Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well. Thanks, Will.
Hey, this week we are joined by Dr. Jacob Wright, no relation, an Emory University professor. He's renowned for his interdisciplinary approach in biblical studies, blending historical, religious, and geographical insights. He was educated in Europe. He previously taught at the University of Heidelberg. Did I say that right? Heidelberg?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
One of the oldest universities in the world. And it was after I finished my dissertation, I went there and taught.
That's amazing.
And then came to Emory right from there.
Oh my
That's
goodness.
amazing.
Yeah, and we are speaking with him today to talk about his latest book, Why the Bible Began.
Yeah.
Which is a book that was on the New Yorker's Best Books of 2023. Hopefully I articulated that correctly.
Top 5 books in religion, or top 5 books in publishers weekly, right?
Yeah, for
amazing.
in religion, not all books, but in religion. But
In religion, that's
some interesting guys up on that, and authors on that list. Guys in the sense of both men and women. But yeah, it's nice
That's
to be
awesome.
nice to be taken seriously. I've written academic books and reach a very small audience of colleagues, and now to be read more widely is just joy, I must say.
Yeah,
Yes.
we are super excited to have you, and I love your book. I love like what you are doing with it. I've got a ton of questions. One of which being, why losers are sort of like promoted, kind of in your book. but I guess to start us off, like just. Yeah, maybe you can just tell us like why did you choose to write this book? Why the Bible Began?
Good question. I think it's the big ideas that I'm attracted to. And we often in biblical studies get into the weeds of particular translations from antiquity and where these texts might have been written and all of those kinds of things. But to take a step back and say, why do we even have a Bible in the first place? Right? Who wrote the Bible, what the Bible's about, how the Bible became a book. Those are like common approaches, but like why? Why are we finding the archives of the great imperial powers from the ancient Near East and Egypt? Why are we finding them in modernity in the last couple hundred years by digging in the ground? Why weren't they transmitted from generation to generation and producing all kinds of massive libraries and commentaries and new religions, Christianity and Islam and all of that? Why? And my colleagues had never really addressed that question, at least
That's an
not a
amazing
long
question.
time. It's a difficult question. It's a messy question because it gets into theological, like, well, maybe it's just because it's God's word. Or maybe there's a theological proprium of like monotheism that makes it distinctive, or maybe it's Jewish genius and all those kinds of very messy, weird.
Definitely Jewish genius.
No,
That's what I vote for.
no. I mean, this is the beginning of Jewishness, so it's probably unfair to say call it totally Jewish or anything. It's really north and south, and the Jewish part comes from the southern kingdom, Judah.
Yes.
And then
Judah.
there's this northern kingdom called Israel. And it's very striking that this north and south and the division between these two kingdoms goes a long way to explain why we have the Bible.
That's really interesting. So maybe we can start with like how did the Bible come into existence? I mean, like most people know, okay, it's a collection of stories and written many years ago, and we have this like book, or at least my Bible has, I don't know how many chapters or books in it. I should probably know that, but it's just compiled of all these different texts.
I think Pastor Josh knows that.
66 books.
Yes.
I think it's 1,022 pages in some versions. I'm trying to remember it's a lot.
In the Masoretic, yeah.
Yeah. So like, how did these stories get selected?
Yeah.
Compressed. I mean, were there like biblical editors that decided sort of which ones to go in there?
Yeah, that's a good question because I have family members and uh, they need to, like, first of all, like, how are you imagining this? And often, I mean, in conservative circles, that question's not addressed because it gets at the authority of Scripture to see that there are
Right.
different hands in the process. And everyone knows there must be different hands in the process, right? Someone like collected 150 Psalms. Well, who was that? Right?
Yeah.
Well, let's just leave that aside and focus on 150 Psalms, and which is a good position because that's all we have is the text.
Right.
But when we examine that text and we start looking for clues and also compare ancient translations that go back to that near that time, like the Greek translation, the Septuagint, or texts that we've discovered archaeologically, right? Like the text that we've discovered from the ancient Near East, but we've discovered some biblical texts, and they're the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran community. And we can look at them, and they're also different. And so we want to know why. No, I want to know why, but most of my colleagues just want to know who and when.
Who, when, where,
Yeah, where all this happened,
how,
and
redaction.
and how they get in there and start comparing translations, textual evidence, and they start saying these things have evolved, and to what degree they've evolved is a bigger question that divides left and right. The right would, more conservative, not the political right here, but the more conservative end of that spectrum would say that most of it goes back to a lot older than the other side believes. But it's interesting that no one says they were written really, Abraham was not writing, right? And so we have to imagine that how did these stories get selected and carried on? So if Moses is the author of Genesis, which a traditional approach has, like he's the author of the whole Torah, the whole 5 books, why did he select Abraham's stories in the way he did? Or did God tell him to do? All of those questions are really never addressed in religious communities because that perspective really gets at the literary quality of the text. And when you
Absolutely.
get into the literary, what I call the texture of the text, it gets away from the kind of simple, these are the things we believe, and just kind of help me understand, Pastor Josh, what I should believe, and I really don't want to have to think about it too
Yeah.
much.
Just tell me. I'll
Just
download it and
it's
I'll do it.
easier. It's easier to outsource decisions,
Yes. Absolutely.
taking ownership of this. But that's the key to the survival of this literature. It has multiple perspectives, different voices, and it requires readers to engage it at a deep level to parse out its meanings. And one cannot do it alone, and one does it in this conversation with others. And indeed, the text is so curious and fun with telling the stories of average folk, including love poetry and laments and all kinds of really wonderful stuff. Much of it with women, and women being the better than the guys in most cases, draws this readership to it. And in that readership, a new form of community evolves. A community that had never existed before in the world, and that has really shaped the world thereafter. And that is a community of readers, a community that comes around a text and says, "This is going to be the core of our identity. It's not going to be even our temple. It's not even going to be our land. Our land is a gift." And that gift can be taken from us. We don't have to have our land, our temple, our palace, our dynasties, or any of our what we call state, what it means to be a country in the ancient world, like a statehood. We don't need any of that to survive. Those things are wonderful if we can have them, but they're gifts. And what we need to survive is this text. Coming together, arguing about it. You can even be an atheist. And why do I say that? The book of Esther has nothing to do with God. But it is one of the most important books, at least in the Jewish community, because the rabbis say, who is a Jew? The one who comes out to hear the book of Esther read once a year at the festival of Purim. And so I teach in a seminary and training pastors, and many of them are, trying to get their communities to be revived and so forth. And I want them to think about, well, make it around the curiosity and the texture of the text, and let them come and make it more of like a reading group, because that's, I think, what the foundation of this community is about. Reading groups around what's text, what they hold sacred to be scripture.
That's
And that's
so good.
I'll shut up. I'm talking too
No,
long.
no, it's all good. Hey, I could sit here and just listen. I'm like, oh wait, I got to ask a question. I'm just like enraptured in what you're saying. I'm like, oh wait, I got to ask something. So, taking a step back, I always like to ask process questions, right? Because we can come to the same destination, but get there in different ways.
Yeah.
And just because you arrived there doesn't mean the route you took is the one that I should take
Yeah.
to arrive where we both have
nice.
arrived.
That's nice.
Because we can get to the same place through good means and good methods and not good methods. So my question is, when you're talking about so when we think about the Bible, right? Because we're in America, because we're in the 21st century in a world that's been shaped by the conflicts of Islam, the conflicts of Islam and Christianity, and how Christianity has shaped this world, and then colonialism and spread it all over the globe, right? There's not a place, I'm saying there's virtually no place that Christianity has not and Judaism is not affected at some level, right? So we all get that skewed, right? So we can think about the ancient Assyrian texts, inscriptions of S.R. Haddon, and look at religious texts or how they worshipped in the temple, and we can look at it fairly objectively because it's not our religion. And maybe objective, that's that's a slippery word, but we can look at it not necessarily having that like personal involvement, unless, of course, we're trying to prove something about the Bible, and then we get weird. We can obviously have bias, but my question is, when it comes to the Bible, it's so hard to be unbiased. Well, we can't, right? So talk a little bit about method. How does someone use sources? What did they do to try to understand the Bible and kind of come at these questions? What's the right method, regardless of where they come to at the end, where they think it's right? Talk to us about method. How do we look at these sources? How do we come at this in kind of an unbiased way to really give the Bible its fair, I don't know, not fair shot, but fair reading, fair
Hearing,
time. Yeah, hearing.
And this is one text, like you're saying, Pastor Josh, in terms of like the Quran is within Islam and Muslim communities, so is the Bible in Jewish and Christian communities. It's a text that you can't really discuss without really ruffling feathers. And how do you then create an environment? And this has been the perennial struggle between academy and church and mosque and synagogue, between how we can still preserve these texts in our communities and that we need them, and the academy that's studying them and showing that in many cases these texts are human. Not human, they're all human, but that they are grown out of human experience, and that they were written like the book of Esther, not through necessarily God speaking to prophets and they writing it down, but just a great story about survival. And that when you start talking about the text like that, and studying it in the academy and trying to compare it to other kinds of literatures, whether it be from the ancient Near East or from more modern times, because the Bible is a very modern text. It's talking, like the book of Ruth, that's a very modern text, about a woman and widows and survival as a widow with her daughter-in-law who's a widow. It gives me goosebumps. But
great story.
It's like Jane
Great
Austen, 2,500 years ago. and we need to be proud of that. And we need to be very proud of that because, as biblical scholars often apologize for, we're studying this text. It's had this great impact, and the impact has been, detrimental. That's one half of the scholarship, and the other says, we're defending these texts. These texts, are not, in all of that kind of divisiveness. But what one we can all join together in the sense of, I wish we would, but we're not doing that. We should be proud of these texts. These texts that we study, that we devote our academic lives to, are fantastic. They have problems, but they're 2,500 years ago, and we still have problems with patriarchy today. So if it were just so
Yes.
simple, like get rid of that, why are we 2,500 years later trying to get rid of it? Number one, in certain ways. And why do these texts actually make so many advances in promoting, when these daughters of Zelophehad come to Moses in the wilderness and they say, the inheritance rights don't include us as daughters, but our father has no son. We don't want his possession to go somewhere else. Like in Jane Austen's, there are 5 daughters, very similar. And Yahweh, the God of Israel, comes down and says, they're right. Change the law. So the law is changed by. That's very interesting stuff, and we can be proud of that as scholars who study that, and we can help religious communities appreciate their text. It doesn't have to be that battle between academy and church. Now, to answer your question, Pastor Josh, in terms of how we go about the methods,
Right.
they range all over the place. My own method is to look more at how the evidence of the text itself, different language, like in one chapter you have this kind of story that contradicts the next chapter or skips over the chapter, and then you look at that intervening chapter and it's different language, and it seems like someone inserted a new episode in it, right? Like the story of Tamar in Genesis 38, it's just like, that's kind of like popped in there. And
Where'd that come from? We were talking about
Yeah.
Joseph.
Yeah, and so there is great, and there's always been that awareness that this is. I think even if we go back to the pre-modern times, because what happens with modernity is there's an attack on the Bible, and that source criticism maybe didn't emerge with that, but it was used for polemical purposes, which then prompted orthodoxy. Both Jewish orthodoxy and Christian kind of fundamentalism to protect the Bible from that, so that anything that has to do
Absolutely.
with that literary quality, because pre-modern Christians and Jewish interpreters were very comfortable with saying that Genesis 38 has been inserted at a later point. You can see how that and they don't say like it's like late and has no authority, but you can see how they're talking about these texts. And then with the modern reaction to the attack on the Bible, then you say, no, it's all very easy to say Genesis 38 is from the same author as 35 and 36 and 37 and 39. And it becomes this battle, when in fact, if we were just to show how our methods, whatever they may be, comparison like our text with other text, or studying the evidence itself of it, or looking for different kinds of archaeological evidence that helps us understand. And my book does a lot with the archaeology. Some readers say too much, but the doing
There
all
can
that.
never be too much archaeology.
Well, for some
Jacob.
it can be. It's like, okay, we get the message. There's a lot of kings, there's a lot of little finds, and there's a lot of big finds, and great. Can we get to the
Yes.
point? And that starts after 9 chapters where we get to defeat, and that's where the book
Nice.
takes off. But I think that we can. That's what my book is trying to do. Is like show that what we're doing in the academy and what I do in my own research, which maybe pushes the envelope in some ways, in good ways, I think, that is going to be conducive. It's not destructive to people of faith. That people of faith can read these texts, this work, and they can see how academics treat it. And they may not agree with stuff. A lot of them don't agree with it. But to kind of get a sense of, wow, this is one of the greatest achievements in human history. The Hebrew Bible, a collection of
Great
texts,
work.
songs, and that have, for Christians, that was the early Christians. For the New Testament authors, right, Josh? That was their Bible. Paul did not understand
Absolutely.
writing his letters as equal to the Torah, and that they became for Christianity scripture. But Christians have always understood
Yes.
the New Testament as a body of text through which one reads the ancient Bible, which was the Old Testament, and that together they are a new Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. But nevertheless, this is a work unto itself, from Genesis all the way to Chronicles, as we have it in most of the Jewish canons, very different from the Christian canon. That this is a work in itself that spawns a New Testament kind of thing, but in itself, it is, and I'll say it proudly, one of the greatest achievements of human history.
Wow. So
question,
cool.
question for you. So, the Bible I have has like the Old Testament, the New Testament. The New Testament was compiled using all these, I don't know, like scrolls or whatever, and the Old Testament was compiled using all these other scrolls. But like, I'm curious, like how, maybe just focusing on the Old Testament for a second, like who decided that these were the texts that we were going to use?
Okay, so that's the kind of canon question. Mm-hmm. So there's a number of books, and there's more than. Wait, sorry, Josh.
I said the big old question.
The canon debate.
The canon
what
question.
comes first, community or canon? Does canon shape the community, or does the community shape the canon? Well,
The chicken or the egg?
for many people, I would say community shapes the canon, but the community is learning from their text, which there's a conversation. It's the community learning from text, and these texts also guide them in the shaping. What I mean by that is that there are books that we know that have been left out. A lot of them. And we see them in being translated into Greek, and then like the Greek Orthodox Church perhaps preserving them in their own canon, which is different from the Western canons. And so we can see there are a lot of texts that didn't, in our tradition, the Jewish tradition, didn't make it. They weren't preserved in the Hebrew, and they didn't become part of the Old Testament. So like one of them is the book of Maccabees. First book of Maccabees is about the war of these family of Maccabees, these fighters against the Greeks, which is going to be celebrated tonight. This is the first day of Hanukkah. I got this on my. I'm Jewish, by the way, and we light candles to commemorate it. In the Jewish tradition, though, we commemorate the oil that lasted 8 nights when there wasn't enough oil at the temple to keep the fire burning, to keep the candle burning. But in the book of First Maccabees, what it's all about is martyrdom, political martyrdom. Give me liberty or give me death. And when we look at why wasn't that included? Like, why did a community, whoever they may be, the rabbis or some synod or how it's imagined, there's a lot of work been done in that area, and it's not really my area, but I can say this, that a book like First Maccabees was not included is because it goes against the whole ethos, the kinds of messages of Jeremiah that say, the empire, we can't stand up against it. We're going to be destroyed unless we bend our necks to the yoke of Babylon and live. So to First Maccabees, that kind of, which is a very big expression within American history, right? Give me liberty or give me death. Liberty at all cost. The Bible says no. It's okay to be in the shadows of empire, because you know what it's all about is community and survival of communities and exile and after defeat and coming around a new form of community, which is not about political borders and power, but about a promise that is given to Abraham, a promise that this people, his and her and Sarah's descendants, would be a blessing to all the world. And that gives a defeated community something to really aspire to. And they try to become a blessing by studying that very text. And that becomes the foundation of their community. And that is, for me, awesome.
Yeah, that is really cool. So
it's amazing.
So maybe a follow up with all the studying that you've done, both of old and new.
Mm.
Are there mistakes in the Bible,
Mistakes. Yeah,
or
that's this is fun. That's a very good question. Like, how do you understand like mistakes? Um, and okay, there are on the most basic level grammatical mistakes where words missing, it's fallen out. And I just had a friend from Art Bruckheim from Washington D.C. like write to me like, why during Ashrei does the noon fall out when we are there's a verse missing? You can tell. And people have argued over that over the ages and so forth. It's there's those kinds of little that's a mistake in the transmission of both the Old Testament and New Testament manuscripts. But when we look at the larger kinds of differences between the Jeremiah book in the Hebrew and the Jeremiah book in the Greek, which is like 35% different,
Wow.
um, major, just kind of a very shorter text in the Greek. Do we say they're mistakes? No. We say this is interesting evidence. This helps us appreciate why this expanded version was preserved in the Jewish tradition rather than the smaller version. And sometimes there's really no reason, rhyme or reason for it, but in some cases it helps us appreciate the contours and the distinctive messages that are being communicated in the text that our ancestors and we preserved. And so how does one understand the guidance of God throughout this whole thing? Because you have different kinds of translations or different kinds of editions of the book of Jeremiah, and the Greek Orthodox Church will have, or other communities that are not in the West will preserve that literature and use it as their canon. Which book is right? Which one has mistakes? And so we just have to, I think, step back and say, look at the diversity and look how this diversity helps us appreciate our own traditions, our own textual traditions, and that getting away from kind of which one is right to, comparing to, I'm looking at the trees right now, species of trees and like noticing their differences. And is it all about like, this tree is now better, this is the right tree, chop the other down? No, they just are wonderful when you compare them.
That is, I love that explanation. I love that analogy. I would love for you to help us work through this idea. And let me give you just a little bit of a context in it. And that's always like, Will always gets worried when I say, let me give you a little bit of context, because then I go like 5 minutes of context. But what I'm really thinking though is that when we have, like, you have all these people that worship God, right? Jewish, Islam, Muslim, and Christian. The Christians have a text that they've, feel like have preserved. You have the Hebrew scriptures, you have the New Testament scriptures or the Christian scriptures that came along. And when people are like looking at this and they're trying to figure it out and they hear scholars debating about it and talking about, Bart Ehrman, there's more mistakes in the Bible than there are words in the New Testament.
Okay.
Well, yeah, right. So in that transmission, like you said, those mistakes in transmission, not in original autographs of the text. But and I'd love for you to speak on that. But my question is, even just helping us.
By the way, I'm going to go on Bart Ehrman's show and talk about that very thing. We're going to do that soon here.
That's
go ahead.
Great,
Sorry, I
man.
interrupted you, but
hey, no worries. Well, what I was wondering about, what I was thinking about, is how can you help us think through what do we do when we just don't know what happened? Like, how do we handle the ambiguity? How do we handle the uncertainty? Because when it becomes uncertain, we can either go negative or positive. Our assumptions make a huge difference in our pre-understandings we bring to this thing called the Bible, make a huge difference on where we're going to go, where the gaps are present and we don't know what's going on. So kind of talk on that, because Christians will hear, Orthodox Jewish people and other Jewish people will hear this, and Muslims will hear, and they're wondering, oh, what's going on? And they're attacking our scriptures. Well, talk to us like what's really happening there on the academic level, and then what do we do with those gaps? How do we handle them?
Yeah,
How do
okay.
we
That
work through
divide
them?
between academy and community.
Yes, we mentioned it early, but it's huge. It's such a big
Yeah.
issue.
It is, and what I love about you guys going in the show, coming from both a conservative, more conservative, and liberal perspective in politics and religion, uh, is you, as we talked about this before the show, it's absolutely necessary that we were doing that we're having these conversations, and the conversations between the academy and the community, the religious community, has to happen. Why? And we were talking about that before the show. It's like we are on the brink. We're about ready to fall over the edge, and there's no going back when you fall. And we think we're not. We think we're in the middle of a desert. It goes on for miles before we fall off the flat Earth. But that's not the case. And we're arguing over the most divisive issues that one could imagine, some of the most smallest, weirdest things that are happening as as agendas are pushed and all kinds of stuff. And we have to find a way forward through dialogue, through conversation, through coming together. And the academy can no longer, and I have so many colleagues who are doing that, who just kind of, their public facing scholarship is about correcting how communities have misunderstood a text and how it's being abused in Christian nationalism. And these are all very good things and important things.
Yeah.
But we're missing the bigger picture. What can we as experts who spend our lives studying this stuff and teaching it, what can we do to contribute to the community? And, the best people who do that within the academy they have a strong religious affiliation, and they're teaching in seminaries, and they really have to give their students something to chew on and to use, not just like, I'm going to go to my community and tell them everything you always thought about the Bible is wrong, and that's it. That's all I got. No, you've got to give them something. You can't take something away, right, ethically, without replacing it. And what are we replacing it with? And so the difference between, in your question also, between Islam and Judaism and Christianity, which is really scary right now, very, very scary. Jews are 0.01% of the population of the world. They're tiny and vulnerable. And when the tide turns, we can see what happened in the 20th century. It's very, very dangerous. And so with the state of Israel and with protecting, like, that's become clear to us that that's not going to be able to protect Jewish life in the way that we thought. And all kinds of differences between religions, and Jews feel very betrayed by many Christians by not coming out and just really denouncing the massacres for itself and not saying any if, ands, and buts about it. Just massacres were awful, and we'll have another day to criticize, but it's not today. That was not done in many Christian quarters, and that's very scary to us. And
Makes
Islam is 25% of the world's population, or 30, it might be 35, I forget, 25 and 30, in just a decade. And many within Muslim communities have no tolerance for Jews, and it's very scary to us. And then when the Christian community and the atheist community and all that. So it's what we have to do, and me as a Jewish professor in a Christian school of theology, is to talk like you guys are doing across boundaries, to find some common ground, to look at how our scriptures have shaped us, to not divide ourselves between academy and community, and to offer some kind of real way forward, so that it's not about Christianity giving up its, the foundations of its faith. No, we want that to be fostered in a way that it makes one confident in the world. Right. Well, as you do with your children, you want to foster that self-confidence, and we want to protect each other, right? And we want to know that we're going to be hospitable to each other, and that's only going to be, I think, done on the small level, on the local level, It's not going to happen at a diplomatic international level. We're going to have to change the conversation and, the marching in the street and all of that. We see that, oh, that's an expression of democracy. You know what it actually is? It's mobs. It's often just mobs. That's not talking. Yelling out some mantra is not talking.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
where's the talking? Where's the conversation? Once you sit down after you've marched through the capitals of, the world, when are you guys sitting down and actually talking to the other side? Because if you can't talk to the other side, are you so stupid that you think you can survive as a family on the earth without talking to your siblings? I'm sorry, I'm a bit pissed.
Yeah, no,
Hey,
it's
I love it. Thanks
yeah.
for expressing your heart, man.
Yeah, so with with our show, we try to talk about issues that intersect faith and politics, and I have a hard time believing that the Bible wasn't written in some regards out of political expression, maybe present at the time. And I would love to get your sense of how politics may have affected the writers, writing the various books within the Bible.
And that's where my book is really looking at it, the perspective that I've really adopted. It's like, yes, theology, I spend a lot of time on that, but the framework of it is a larger political project. And I saw on somewhere on social media where I had published a piece, and then in Sojourners, I think, and then something like politics and the people, the Bible is a political thing. And a lot of people in the pews, you could tell, on Facebook and so forth, no, the Bible's not political. The Bible is theological and religious. I think both of you understand that that's not a duality. They go together, right? The biblical vision of a community, what I call peoplehood, is a political project. And we cannot isolate our religious communities from the larger political conversations. Because you know what? That alleviates people of faith from addressing things that are going on Saturday night, when the book of Judges talks about the most awful atrocities committed against one of the least members of the society, this concubine. And when we go to go to our religious communities the next days and we don't read text like that, and we avoid them, we create Bibles within our Bibles. And so the political is, to answer your question, Will, is very, very foundational to this, and to provide a bit of perspective. So you have different politics in the Bible. One of them is what I call the palace history, where it's all about King David and the dynasty and Jerusalem and power and our ability to take down Goliath. And another part is about, who saved us? It was Yahweh, our God, at the most foundational moment. And that was liberation from slavery in Egypt. And that's the moment that we have to place primacy on. That's where it has to be at the beginning. The prologue to it all has to be a family story, which is very political because all of the descendants are representatives of different tribes. And so the 12 tribes, the sons, Reuben, Gad, what have you, Judah, they represent peoples. And when the book of Genesis says, they all go back to one family, we all go back to one family, that's a political statement. Whether it's actually factual, biologically or not, it's a political statement of unity. And the book of Exodus is very much about, no, it wasn't a king. It wasn't David who created us. It wasn't David who saved us at the beginning of it all. Before David ever came, generation and generation and generation lived. And it goes back to the generations that saw the salvation that Yahweh wrought for us at the Red Sea. And that is now a move to, is it just theology and say, no, don't do politics, we're all going to just join a religious community? No, it's about we can be a people who covenant together like we did at Sinai. And that these laws in this publicly written document, which is the direct predecessor, indisputably, not the direct, but the indirect, I should say, predecessor for the kinds of written documents that we place at in our bosoms of our democracies, the Constitution and so forth, that we all can
Mm-hmm.
appeal to a public document. And that document, like in the Torah, lays out what does it mean to be in solidarity with each other? What does it mean to
Mm.
care for your neighbor? What does it mean to not, put a stumbling block in front of those who are visually impaired? Right? Kinds of basic laws that we would say are public access laws. And that they are revealed to be, and yes, it's theological. That's because it comes down at Sinai from our God. But that what God delivered to us is such a public, shared document like the laws of our nations today. And these laws are going to tell us about loyalty and faithfulness to our God, but also to each other. And the question then, Will, is can one somehow learn from that project for modern democracies? That kind of shifting of the attention from the palace, what I call, to the people, pushing the palace back in history, and having a peoplehood that's around around a God. Let's face it. It's the story of the Bible is the story of God's relationship with a people, and it's a tumultuous relationship. And the book of Hosea imagines it as a marriage, a wedding, or not a relationship of abuse that turns to a different way. And all of that is very much theological, right? It's like literature in the real sense of a saga, and it's beautiful. But can one then apply the insights of this text, this project of peoplehood? Can one apply the insights to our modern situations in which what replaces God if we don't have God at this, as ancient Israel has? And I don't know the answer to that. And and it's difficult. It's a very difficult one. That's what we're all struggling with. What is the basis of our identity? And my intuition is that we need it to be around text, like it was for the emerging Jewish community after defeat. It needs to be around a shared body of text that excite our imagination and draw us together and allows not some texts are going to be excluded, right? Because you can't have a corpus of text without kind of, this is going to be what we all share now. And this is where we're going to come together, and this is where we're going to hash these things out. And we're going to learn from each other when we're hashing these things out, is that, you know what, when I'm arguing with you, I actually learn new stuff.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you as a sparring partner on these texts. I think that's the way forward, even without necessarily having a theological component in our modern democracies. So that what I'm trying to do in that book is say, yes, the Bible has some real implications for the way we do politics.
Yeah. So kind of staying in that vein with politics and faith, religion. Recently, the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was speaking at a meeting, National Association of Christian Lawmakers, where he stated that the Lord told me very clearly to prepare to become a Moses who will lead the nation through a Red Sea moment. That's a quote.
Wow.
And
I had no idea you said that.
and I'd love to kind of maybe just get your, not necessarily reaction, but explanation of what that really kind of means or represents. Especially, I mean, so a podcast like ours, we have a lot of diverse group of listeners, some believers, some not. That comment is obviously probably dog whistle for a particular set of individuals that are sort of trained to hear it. But what is that imagery sort of represent as you hear it?
I have to say that I don't know enough about what he represents. I know that it is a shift towards a more direct application of the biblical model to our democracies in ways that I'm uncomfortable with personally. And I think that we can't just immediately write off and attack at all levels. We have to say, once again, you got to have a conversation around this. What's driving that? What needs to can we speak to, right? What's driving that? That's about communication. You have to understand, like, okay, my partner in this conversation is saying one thing, but what does she really want? What's it really about? And in our modern news cycles, we just take pot shots at each other, that's driven by the needs for media to excite fear and anger and all that. Stories that make us angry on Twitter are the ones that we really gravitate to.
Yes.
And it's just really problematic. It's so destructive. We are on the scale for division in our country. Ray Dalio, forget exactly where I read that, but shows that that we're almost at the point of the Civil War when that was our lowest level in the country, and we're almost there. We're not there. So we have to.
We don't want to go there.
We don't want to go there, and people are like saying, I'll follow my sword for these issues, and we can't. And we have to figure out what's driving both sides. And I call on the other side also, who want to do that. Can you listen to us too? Right?
Yes.
Can you listen to those Jews amongst us who might be have something to say? And I think that there is a will to have a conversation around that from the side sometimes. So you really have to really seize on that and go with it. And to answer your image, to answer your question about the image, Will, about Moses leading, what would give me pause is, okay, what's the Red Sea here, and what's Egypt, and what was slavery?
What are the things this maps onto in real life?
Yeah, what is
are you
slavery?
saying?
Or is this like, are you really trying to say like the Biden period is slavery? If so, you can think that it's oppressive, but those use of those images can be very harmful because the Pharaoh, in our understanding, Jewish was satanic,
Evil.
Even though during Passover we actually try to have compassion and pour out some of the wine for those who were killed during the plagues. But that was an evil thing, and it's mythological in the sense, not that it's false or not historical, but it's symbolic. It's a salvation moment. It teaches a larger theological message and political message, and it's a message of really leaving total darkness behind. And when one side presents the other side as total darkness, we're done. We're done.
I completely agree with you, and that's what we do.
And so I want to have those hard conversations. I want to with Will ask, what is this about? And is this being hospitable to those of us who don't even want to talk about Moses? We don't think that Moses should be in the conversation. I'm not saying I think Moses should be. Bruce Feller wrote a book on Moses that's just wonderfully relevant, makes it very wonderfully relevant to our, without saying this is, shoving it down someone's throat in an authoritative way.
Yes.
But all of that, if people don't want to talk about Moses in the public sphere and so forth and use it as authority, that's one thing. That one can actually use imagery from the Bible without it being abusive and so forth is another. And we got to show the way forward with that, because I want to make the Bible more of a public document that is not necessarily you have to believe to appreciate it. As I said earlier, the book of Esther doesn't have God in it. And it's really about people coming together around shared. So making that text as a whole, I would say this, Will, also, when we read Homer, Zeus and all kinds of gods are in it, right? But we still read Homer.
Yeah, we do.
That literature was holy for ancient Greeks.
It was.
But we read it today. The problem is, in a certain sense, is that our texts, like Homer, are still sacred for us. And perhaps rightly so. But we have to also, when we're not a part of that group who treats them as sacred, and that's where I shift between my public theology, my public facing kind of conversations,
Mm.
um, kind of hat, and the more inner communal hat. Um, we have to appreciate that that one side can read this text and use this text and learn from it in a way that, if that side is not really down with all the theology, nevertheless it can be it can be something meaningful. It can be a text that we can come
Mm.
around and learn, just like we do with Homer and other kinds of literature in which gods also play a role. It doesn't have to be about belief necessarily. And those who do believe have to make it possible for non-believers, if you will, to access those texts and study them with us. And that will make for that. I would say this also, Will. It's necessary too, because it's unavoidable. It has shaped our present, and to admit to that and to study it is absolutely necessary, and to learn to use symbols and so forth from that in a way that's effective, and also modeling a non-religious perspective for those who are not religious is also a wonderful thing. And Bruce Feller shows how that's been done within American democracy with the image of Moses. And yeah, I think that it's back to that point about a will to come together and to find, and whatever is being said about Moses right now from that side, that could be divisive. It sounds like it's divisive. It sounds like it's a two good bad guy kind of duality. And one of the things, the biblical text I'm really proud of, is that their characters, there is no clean good guy bad guy duality. The reason why these texts are so interesting is that all of the characters are morally complex.
Yes.
And yeah, I think
That's
that,
just,
yeah.
oh, I love that. I love because we forget that. We forget that they're people. We feel like because it's sacred. I'm speaking for myself. So
Yeah.
I'm a guy, I'm conservative. I believe in, primary Mosaic authorship, I should say. I don't think Moses wrote he was the most humble man that ever lived. I also think that it seems like all the sources that used in Genesis, like Exodus and Genesis, just seemed stylistically somewhat. So I don't know exactly how it all got compiled, but I do feel like Moses played a primary part in it. And yet at the same time, my faith doesn't have to ride on that. Right.
Mm.
It doesn't have to ride on that. Although I do believe in authority and infallibility and inerrancy, and still working through what I mean by that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It's just kind of weird. But all this saying, like, we've been talking about Homer, we've been talking about Pharaoh and Moses. I really have this like burning question I gotta ask from a Jewish man who has studied the scriptures to the extent that you have. What do you think about Jesus? And what role does the person of Jesus play in the future of trying to make any kind of peace or any kind of conversation or anything like that? It's okay if it's no role. I'm curious
Okay.
about what your views of Jesus are.
A note to readers.
Yeah.
I am Jewish. So,
Yes,
so
absolutely.
what Josh is asking me is, as someone who doesn't understand, it's not a Christian.
Yeah.
How
Jesus isn't divine. He's not. He was.
Well,
Okay.
let me say this. As a Jewish male, the whole infatuation with this, from my perspective, infatuation. I should call it worship. Sorry, I should not.
Yeah.
The worship
It's
of
all
another
good.
Jewish male is weird, and difficult, because it can, we are not like Jesus.
Mm.
right? And he was a Jewish male, and you could be like Jesus and all that. So there is that element to it. But I'll say this: when Jews who are trained in rabbinic writings come to the New Testament, we recognize it's familiar to us, very
Wow.
familiar to us, and Jesus. How you understand this character in terms of just literature, or whether you treat Jesus as God's only begotten Son, we all have to admit that he's doing something that is very Jewish. Okay.
Yes.
And then, so what do I see as the future of this Jewish teacher, whether one views this Jewish teacher as God's only begotten Son or just a
Sure.
Jewish teacher?
Yeah.
What do I see the future of that, of Jesus in? Here I am talking as a Jew. It's a difficult question. I can't believe you're asking me this, but I think that once again, the ability of communities of faith to make discussions around this safe and hospitable. I hate to use the word safe. I like hospitable, right? We come.
Yeah, that makes
It's not
sense.
going to be safe for us. There's going to be pain,
Yeah,
but
for
it can
sure.
be hospitable. And if we can't make that, okay, you can come to my community and you can say Jesus is not God, but we're not going to chase you out and say, "Hey," we're going to have ways to have conversations, because we need to recognize
Right.
that it's about the conversation,
Right.
the text, and the dialogue. When in Job, God comes down and says, all these friends of Job who have actually just rehashed the conventional theology, they have not spoken rightly of me. And Job, who just does something really radical, Job's spoken right of me. Job will pray for you other guys. And so the appreciating that, and Josh, as you try to, show your communities that kind of real engagement with these texts, honest engagement with texts,
Yes.
is what these
Yes.
texts want from themselves.
Yes.
And then making it possible that others who don't see Jesus as God to come together and have conversations. That kind of
Absolutely.
religious community will have political implications, because it will train us in the process, in the activity of talking, to realize, my neighbor who is a Trump supporter and the other neighbor who is a Biden supporter, they can cross the street and talk to each other, because we do that in our Bible studies. We have an atheist in our Bible study, and we allow him to talk.
That's awesome. Yeah, of course.
That's really cool. So what this is my last question, but like what are some other areas in the study of the Bible's origin that you still think need more study, more focus,
Wow.
exploration?
These have been great questions and very difficult ones. I'm once we stop airing, I'm going to have a few words with you guys.
I'm gonna get a talking to.
Come to Jesus talk. Do not give your guests those type of difficult questions. So what are some of the areas that I think that should, the Jesus question was much more difficult, of course, but this one is difficult in the sense of thinking now in terms of both the kinds of scholarship that we need to bring to the wider public, like this book is doing, and the kinds of things that we need to be doing as scholars, working with getting in the weeds and very technical kinds of things. And some of those things are around archaeological fine tooth combing of DNA testing that we can do now that we couldn't do 10 years ago, and pollen counts and all of that. There's a lot of really wonderful stuff to be done there, and a big future for that kind of Max Planck laboratory research that's being done. But then also in all kinds of stuff that we're doing in comparing our text to other kinds of text and learning from different kinds of material culture about daily life and how we understand the text. All of that is going to be done and needs to be more of it, and we need to have public support for that. I think the National Endowment for the Humanities, I got a fellowship from them, one of the first in many years in biblical studies, and the reason why is I could like make that Bible talk not just for religious. That's very important for the National Endowment. And so there's lots to be done in terms of getting public funding to support what we're doing, because it's going to bring communities together. It's going to bring academy and communities together. I think that's the argument that we really need to be making. And in terms of making, as we've been saying all hour here, making what we're doing valuable to communities who will like say, thank you for doing this. It's not just something that we have to resist and do this apologetics with. You're enriching our experience, and that only can be done if the other side can learn to bring our scholarship. And this is to answer your question: needs to be done is bringing our scholarship to bear on public discussions in a more sophisticated manner than just whether the Ten Commandments should be displayed or not. That's what biblical scholars spend a lot of time doing when they're talking politics, without talking about, what the Bible does? It introduces, like I'm saying in the book, the first distinction between nation and state, that there's a people and there's a country, and the two are separate, and that is foundational for our own modern political understandings. And we need to start focusing on these bigger pictures of how communities come around text and shared bodies of laws and all of that, and trying to make that case in a way that is not going to turn off people who are not down with Jesus, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And hey, this is a really difficult one I'm going to throw you.
Oh man, I thought I was done.
How can people keep up with your work?
Oh,
and
yeah.
how can they find your next project?
Well, I was off social media until this all happened, and so I got back on, so it's now easy to find me on, I think, Twitter or X or whatever it's called, and and the reason why there is, and also Facebook, is because I'm posting pics of Hank. I wish I could show you right now. Hank is my
I can hear him. Yeah, I can hear him.
I hear Hank. I
And
already
he's my
appreciate
dog,
Hank.
and we're pals, and so that's really the attraction. But reach out to me. There's jacob.wright@emory.edu, and leave a review. Even if you don't buy the book, leave a review, because I like hearing from. Some of them are kind of cruel. Those are reviews. I read one a couple days ago, like, that just ruined my morning. It's like this: I'm on page 120, and this is boring as hell.
What?
Thank you for making it that
terrible.
far.
Even if you want to say that to me, I'll take it, because I want honesty, and because I learned also from from that guy. I actually learned a lot. Don't make it boring as hell.
Yeah, exactly, dude. Well, thank you so much
thank
for
you.
being on the show here, Jacob. Man, it has been a pleasure to interview you. We're going to post links to your book and everything on the show notes, and how people can
Well, I
contact
appreciate you
on the
guys bringing
website.
me on. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely.
And we dug deep. The questions really were thought provoking, and I hope your readers, or your not readers, but your audience, find something useful there. I hope they also pick up some of the stuff we talked about and take it in their own direction.
And I hope they buy the book. That's what I mean. We want our people to go out and buy the book, learn it, whatever. Read the book.
Share
get
the book
involved
widely.
with
I'm
its-
willing to come to your
Yes.
communities and do Zoom things and all of that. All the proceeds of the book go
Ooh,
to
that would
the
be
Atlanta.
awesome.
Yeah, I'll hop on no charge to do Zooms. That's easy for me. Also because I don't have to. I want Hank around. But but all the proceeds of the book
That's
go to the
awesome.
Atlanta mission. So when I say buy the
Wow.
book, it's about getting the book in your hand. It's cheap, relatively cheap, and it's about sharing it, because I think I put my heart and soul in this, and I think there's some real truth in it, and it's helpful to us. And also, if you can support the Atlanta mission, I'll say that directly. That's also be helpful. It's a Christian mission. I'm Jewish, but I think they're doing really good work.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And this has been Dr. Jacob Wright, again, professor at Emory University, and his book, Why the Bible Began. That's what it's called, right? I don't have it right in front of me. Yes, Why the Bible Began. I have it on my Why the Bible Began, and I'm currently reading it. I love I think it's awesome. So
I appreciate you
we-
guys. I thank you for the encouragement.
absolutely.
Yeah, thank
It's
you.
so good. Well, to our listeners and our watchers, if you join us on YouTube, we're so thankful for you.
And Josh, I want to say
until
you
we
have
see you
a-
next time.
You
Go
have an
ahead.
incredibly beautiful fade there. I'm very impressed by that.
Thank you.
That's just-
I appreciate
Oh.
that. I'll have to compliment my
Your
barber
barber?
next
Yeah.
time I go there. Yes.
You should put
And,
you should drop his name too, and you're like,
Yeah, we'll put a link
Yes.
to
We'll put a link to my barber in there as well. Well, guys, until next time, don't keep your conversations left or right, but up. And have a great one. Bye.